There we go. All right, so we are jumping right into the teaching today. I am grateful to be in California today. You know why? Because if we were in Texas, it would feel and be 20 degrees hotter. So grateful to be in Northern California. What a beautiful day that we have. Couple very brief announcements. First, if you are a guest with us today, we have a welcome table. Where is it, Dar? Is it straight there in the back? In the lobby, and we have a gift for you. So a little gift bag and your pick of a free book, one of the 5 books that we call our essential collection here, and we hope that you'll grab that on your way out. And we're glad that you're here today. Also, want to say for those of you who are eager beavers, always willing to lend a hand today, we do not need your help taking down tables and chairs because we've got a second very large funeral coming in today, and they're going to be using the courtyard after that for a reception. Just want to say how amazing this place is to be a space for all kinds of things. You know that we do this for recovery and children and nonprofits. Yesterday we had a very large memorial service for a man named Bob Massaro, who was part of the building commission here in Napa, reputable builder here in Napa, and also in Southern California. And just a 2-hour service in there because there was so much to say about Bob. And then this courtyard just became transformed into a place of more love and sharing and food. And that's going to happen today again for a man named Alan Milamaki, who died in a tragic motorcycle accident, you may remember, about a month ago or so. So be praying for this space, that this continues to be a place where the shalom of God just flows through, as it so often does. So you were given a handout today with 3 weird words on it, and hopefully you grabbed a tassel, which is going to be important for you. At least as you leave, make sure that if you didn't get one, make sure you get one of those tassels before you go, because I think you're going to want one as a little object lesson. So there are 3 foreign words on your handout, and there's space in the text today to write some notes if you want. The first word is a Greek word called sozo. Everybody say sozo. Everybody say this Hebrew word, sit, sit. And everybody say the next Hebrew word, kanaph. All right, let's do that again. Sozo, sit, sit, kanaph. These will all make sense in due time. So in preaching class, which I actually took, believe it or not, they generally teach you in our Western world to look at a text and say, I'm going to drill down and talk about one thing in a particular text and leave the rest behind so people can walk away with that one thing. Sometimes I do that, but as you know, not very often. Because in situations like today, the text is so rich, there's so much there that for me to just dial into one thing would be to the neglect of many things. And I think that we have the capacity to be rabbinical and Eastern in our sensibilities. And what I mean by that is when the rabbinical folk would get together and look at a particular text, they weren't looking for just one thing to glean from a text. They were looking for all the things and talking about all the things. And in the Eastern tradition of which Judaism was born, they were in an oral tradition, a narrative tradition, and they would tell stories to be remembered and talked about in their fullness. Today there is so much rich stuff here. I just want to walk with it through it with you slowly. And if there's a thing or two that you want to jot down that speaks to you, then we'll trust that God's in the mix. So let's just jump in. So we catch up in the Gospel of Mark in chapter 5, 21 to 42, and this translation we're looking at happens to be the New Revised Standard Version. So when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Now, we remember last week we talked about the stories of David and Goliath and Jesus calming the seas. And at that time, when Jesus calmed the sea, he was on his way from the Jewish side of the Lake Galilee, or we call it the Sea of Galilee, to the Gentile side of the Sea of Galilee. And the storm got up, and Jesus calmed it down, and people freaked out. Well, as soon as he got over to the Gentile side, which is not where a Jewish person is supposed to be, but he went there anyway because Jesus was a rule breaker. Once he got over there, there was this guy with something serious going on. Now, we would probably say in our world, in our vernacular today, that he had some serious mental health issues. But people back in antiquity didn't know to call it that. And so I think they probably would have called this guy is demon possessed because he is acting like he is out of his mind, because he was. And so Jesus sees this guy, has a conversation with this guy. He says, my name is Legion because I have so many demonic things happening in me. This man, he had serious issues. This was a guy who ran around in a graveyard naked. Who wouldn't be afraid of that? And the whole town people were afraid of him. And Jesus has a conversation with him, and by his word, this guy is healed of his trouble. He experienced well-being. His mind is calmed. And the townspeople, seeing that at his word, this guy who they were terrified of is now well, their reaction to that was, thank you, and please leave because we're terrified of you. What might you do to us? So Jesus got back in the boat and went back to the Jewish side of the Sea of Galilee. And once he got there, this is what happens. Then, once he landed, one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, everybody say Jairus, because that's the way you pronounce his name, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, my little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay hands on her so that she may be made well and live. And the word for healing that he was after was the Greek word sozo. Everybody say sozo. Thank you. So he went with him. Now, I just want to take a second here and appreciate what we see. This is a leader in the community. The synagogue was a key place for those Jewish people to come together and remember who they were, just like we come together to remember who we are. And because it was under Roman occupation, that community meant even more. The fact that Jairus was the synagogue leader meant that he had renown in the community, that he was looked to with great esteem. He was probably wealthy and had more power than most in that community. This was a guy who people came and begged for help. He was not the one who would kneel and beg. So imagine in your mind a powerful person in our country who may have reason for pride. Imagine what it would take for that person to bend the knee and beg. Because that's what's happening here. It's out of his desperation. He can't help but be humbled because he is so wanting and desperate for his daughter's well-being. And so he does. He throws himself at Jesus' feet. Please come see my daughter because she's about to die. Make her sozo. And a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. And why would they do that? Well, a couple reasons. One, he was growing in his fame. He was known as a great teacher and a miracle worker or a magician. And because they just saw Jairus come and fall at his feet and beg for him to come to his house and do one of these healing maneuvers. And so everybody knows who Jairus is, and they know there's a show to be seen. So, it may have been a crowd anyway, but now it's a serious crowd because they all want to know how this is going to play out. It's a huge crowd. And they move forward. Now, there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. That's important. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had. And she was no better, but rather grew worse. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this for a moment. And I have taught on this passage several times because I've been here forever, and that's what's going to happen. There may even be something new today. We'll see. And there is for today. What I want to tell you about this woman is that she'd been suffering with this for 12 years. Now, my guess is, we don't really know, but probably sometime around the beginning of when she started to menstruate, she never stopped. The age when she would begin menstruating is when she would be actually married off. And the dream would be is that she would have children. Because back in Jesus' day, women were literally treated as property. They didn't have the same rights as men. They were treated as property. And the highest hopes you could have as a woman at that time was to bear children, because that's how you kind of proved yourself. And those very children that you would bear would care for you in your old age. That was gone. And because of actuarial tables, and we know that people didn't live, for the most part, very deep into their 30s, let's say that she started menstruating at 12 or 13 or 14 years old. Well, now we're at 22, 24, 25 years old, even older than that. And that means that even if she were healed, whatever dream she had of children was gone. And whatever dowry that she had, which may have been significant, we don't really know, that's gone because she spent all she had on her health care. This is a very relevant story today because we have a lot of people in our country that have gone broke because of healthcare expenses. Wiped out. This woman knew all about that. But it's worse. People who were deeply religious and understood Jewish law knew that there were laws for women who were menstruating. There's a whole chapter devoted to it in the book of Leviticus, which is a bunch of legal laws. Long and the short of it, when you're on your period, you are deemed unclean. You are not welcome to be in a crowd of clean people. To make matters worse, anything you touch, anything you sit on, anything your clothing touches, anything your hands touch, also becomes unclean. This means that for the last 12 years, because she was on a perpetual cycle, she was deemed unclean, not welcome in community, not able to go to her synagogue out of fear that she may defile somebody else. She was ostracized because of her health condition. Ostracized because of who she was, what she was unable to change. Does that speak to today? Is there anybody that we know that has been ostracized, not because of anything they have chosen, but because of something that they are struggling with? Something of who they are and they can't help. Yeah. There are people who are lonely for similar reasons today. Well, the story continues. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, if I but touch his clothes, I will be made well. And again, that word for made well is sozo. Now, this is a curiosity to me. Do you think after 12 years, this woman is aware that whatever she touches, she turns unclean? Yes? Right. If she ever forgot, the crowd would certainly tell her. Do you think she was known in that seaside community? Of course. People knew who she was. And so here she comes. And this isn't just like catching a guy walking down the street all by himself. Remember what we got here. We have a throng of people that are going from the beach where Jairus fell at Jesus' feet to ask for prayer for his daughter. And now you've got all these people that are all around Jesus making their way to Jairus' house, shoulder to shoulder, robe to robe. And somehow this woman sneaks a grab on Jesus' cloak, on his robe. Do you think it was possible for her to go touch Jesus' robe without touching anybody else? No, it was not. That means that this woman who knows what the rules are, that woman who is known by her community for her condition, is choosing to violate the current societal norms and take the risk of barging through those people so she can get and touch the master's robe. That means she is making all the people unclean that she touches on her way there. And who else is getting unclean at the very end? Jesus. That's an audacious, bold, courageous faith. If this thing doesn't go well, there are going to be a whole lot of people that are very angry, including perhaps Jesus himself. That's the kind of boldness that she has when she goes for it. Well, immediately, her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And the disciples said to him, well, you see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, who touched me? But he looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing that it happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. And Jesus said to her, daughter, your faith has made you sozo. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. So first, I just want to shout out to this woman for coming forward. She could have just kind of snuck away, to a corner somewhere. Nobody paid a lot of attention to her anyway, and maybe somebody else could, try to hide the blame, and she could go away healed. But she knew that would probably not work out, because the guy who had this power flowing through him probably could figure it out who the winner was that day. And so she decides to go sooner than later to fess up. I think there's a real lesson here for life. Would you agree that it's usually better to just fess up sooner than later when we do something that we probably should not have done? I've known people that didn't fess up for a day or two, or a week or two, or a month or two, or even a decade or two. And let me tell you, in every case, the longer it goes, the longer before the person is honest, the more the pain increases. I would even say that it is possible for us to lie to ourselves, to not be honest with ourselves about ourselves, and carry with us deep pain for a very long time that could have been healed up in part very early. I also want to point out how Jesus addresses her. He doesn't address her as, you jerk, how dare you rob me of power today? But he calls her daughter. Isn't that just so Jesus? That he has the opportunity to kind of, make a lesson out of her mistake, but instead values her. When was the last time she was called daughter? That's beautiful. And then the last thing that was a curiosity to me, particularly this time around, is what Jesus says after that. Your faith has made you well. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Then he says, go in peace. All right, that part makes sense. And then he says, and be healed of your disease. But she was already healed. The hemorrhage stopped. So why does Jesus need to say be healed if she's already been healed? And I think there's something for us. This is very midrash of us. So if we get too Greek and too specific on this, we're going to waste some time. But if we decide to go Jewish midrash on this, which means to glean some things that maybe even the original authors didn't see for themselves, it's okay. When he says be healed of your disease, I think there's something here for us to learn. I got back surgery, or had back surgery, about 14 years ago. L5-S1, if you need to know the specifics. And I was in great pain for the many months that led up to that, and was told about the risks of surgery and all this stuff. But I talked to somebody who had the exact same surgery I was going on. I said, hey, man, did that work for you? And he says, it absolutely worked for me. So I got the surgery, and it was amazing. On the way to Sacramento for surgery, I was in horrific pain the whole way because sitting was really, really painful. And it didn't help when there were potholes. Once I had the surgery and came home later that day, I had no pain in my sciatic nerve at all. But what I did have was surgical pain. And I found out from my friend who had the surgery that it took about a year for that to slowly and surely go away, the surgical pain. There was healing that happened, but there was healing that still needed to happen over time. You get me? Anybody who struggled with COVID, you may be COVID-free when you see that you are negative on that test. That doesn't mean you're done with the healing, because your energy is zapped and it's going to take you time to heal over this thing. I'll say, too, that when we have emotional things that need healing and we get healing from those things, it's not one and done. You may say a prayer today that you feel great relief from because God has spoken to you and invited you into a new state of healing or well-being in your life, and it may be profound today. And you might even say, I've been touched by God today. But guess what? Tomorrow, the healing process continues. People who say no to an addiction today have a whole lot of relearning to do tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. Here's good news and bad news, any way you want to look at this. The good news is you can find healing. The bad news, or good news, is that healing process is going to take the rest of your life. The good news on that is that healing can happen the rest of our life. And it's not necessarily physical. Do you know how many people that asked Jesus to be healed died? All of them, right, Norm? All of them. So I wonder if that's why Mark chose to use, or the authors of Mark chose to use the word sozo, or sozo. Because sozo means more than physical healing. Some of you today may not have any physical ailments, but I bet because you're a human being, there are areas where we all need to be healed, where we all need to continue to be healed. And maybe you can dial into that today. Well, the story continues, because I haven't even gotten to the other two fancy words today. We've talked about sozo a lot, but we haven't gotten to Tzitzit or Kanaph yet at all. Well, while he was still speaking to this woman who he just healed, or who experienced healing, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter's dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" And at this point, I just want to raise a question. I wonder how Jairus is feeling right now. Sad for sure. I wonder if he's a little frustrated, angry. Thank you, Norm. Why? Because he told Jesus we need to rush, because my daughter, who's 12 years old, is dying. We got to get there now. And Jesus decided to take a pause. Maybe if Jesus hadn't taken that time, they would have gotten to his daughter's bedside just in time. I just want to point that out, that there had to be some level of frustration and maybe anger mixed in with his sadness, deep sadness at losing his daughter. But the story continues. But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him in a mocking kind of way. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with them, the disciples, and went in there where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. When Jesus chose to touch this dead girl, he violated another Jewish law. He made himself unclean, according to the book of Numbers, which said that once you touch a corpse, you are unclean for a week and must go through ceremonial acts of cleansing before you should be in public. We have two interesting stories here of people who knew better and did something anyway that caused uncleanness to go forward. Two holy events that came together at the same time. A couple nerd notes here. The reason Jesus chooses this, just three disciples, this is sort of a hearkening to Elijah and Elisha and the Hebrew scriptures about some similar kinds of things they did. These three are going to be key leaders in the church. They get to see the transfiguration. So that's kind of why they show up in that place. But I really want to talk now about what these three words mean when we bring them together. And they have a lot to do with this picture on the screen. So those of you who are sitting way back in the comfort of shady trees, this may be harder for you to see. But what you actually have here are Jewish, very specific Jewish tassels. They are called tzitzit. Everybody say tzitzit. All right. So the Jewish tzitzit was a meaningful creation. It was made with 8 strands, and it had 5 knots along the way. 5 knots representing the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures, the Torah, the books of the law. And the 8 strands, together with those, if you added those two numbers up, 5 for the Torah, and then the 8 strands gives you the number 13. Did I get my math right? All right. If you take the numerical value of the Hebrew word tzitzit, it adds up to 600. So you have 600 plus 5 knots plus 8 strands, and you get 613. Is there a reason why 613 might be a meaningful number for Jewish people? Because it is the number of Jewish laws that they were called to keep. So rabbis in their day, they would attach their tzitzit to the edge of their robe or the corner of their robe called the Kanaph. And they would do so because they wanted to remember themselves as they walked around, kind of like you might wear a cross to remind you of your commitment. They would wear a tzitzit on their kanaph, on their robe, to remind them that I am trying my best to adhere to all 613 laws. In the Jewish tradition, there's a prophecy in the book, or the prophecy book, of Micah. And it talks about when the Anointed One comes, there will be healing in his wings. Healing in the wings of the coming Messiah. The word kanaph can be translated as the corner of a robe, but it can also be translated as wings, as in the wings of a robe. At this time in history, when Jesus was walking around, where there was apocalyptic fever, where everybody was looking for the coming Messiah and talking about what's going to happen when the Messiah comes, surely that prophecy would have come out, where it said, there will be healing in the wings of the Messiah. So here's this woman who has no other hope, but she remembers there may be healing in the wings of the Messiah. There may be healing in the kanaph of the robe of the Messiah, where the tzitzit is attached. And so she chooses, this is kind of a crazy irony, she chooses to walk in faith, to be so bold in faith as to blow through this crowd, which was kind of an act of faithlessness because she was making them unclean, but her faith compelled her to reach out and touch the tzitzit and the kanaph so that she would have healing. As she's doing that, she's violating the tzitzit and the kanaph. You follow me here? Isn't that odd? And then we follow up with Jesus. And he's wearing his robe with the kanaph and the tzitzit, trying to bring about Sozo. And he's there with this little girl, remembering that he's wanting to honor the full law that formed him. And then he touches a corpse, making him unclean. Faithfulness and apparent contradiction at the same time. Oh, there's a lot here. There's a lot here. This is one of those examples that we need to remember about how Jesus lived in the world. That Jesus always deferred to the spirit of shalom over the letter of the law. He always deferred to the spirit of shalom over the letter of the law. Can you say that with me? Jesus always deferred to the spirit of shalom over the letter of the law. And in this case, so did this hemorrhaging woman. And so my question for you is, where do you need sozo? Jesus said it was your faith who made you well. He didn't take credit for it. He said it was your faith that made you well. And I want to offer this idea to you that maybe sozo is bigger than we think. And by offering prayers to God saying, I want more sozo, I want more sozo, we may have a specific idea in mind, and we may even have a very specific request on how that dream or that idea might be realized when we pray to God. But I want to encourage you first to pray. First to learn from this hemorrhaging woman. To go boldly, as Paul would, or as the Hebrew writer would eventually say, to go boldly into the presence of God in your prayers, asking for sozo. But as you do, remember that sozo may be bigger than the healing you're asking for. May be different than the healing you're asking for. Do you understand what I mean? So go boldly and reach out for the tzitzit on the kanaph in your pursuit of sozo. Because you're invited to do so. And we have the example of the daughter who did so and found healing. But the other side of it that we cannot forget is that the one who was touched and the one who touched was wearing the tzitzit on his kanaph as he was promoting Sozo. And if we as Jesus followers, or at least we claim to be Jesus followers, want to actually follow in the footsteps of Jesus, that means that we will actually follow Jesus. That means at times we will act like he acted. In our pursuit of following Jesus, we may follow the spirit of shalom, which may contradict the letter of the law. The church of Jesus Christ in the world needs to hear that, because we are known globally, and especially here in the United States, when people think of the word Christianity, they think of legalism, which is meaning paying more attention to the letter of the law than the spirit of shalom. What was Jesus doing here? First of all, he's standing up. He's coming alongside two women, or one young girl who's maybe not quite a woman, technically, in their world. And then you have this woman who her life was kind of behind her for the most part. He's lifting both of them up, which is a justice move, isn't it? It's saying, you are of great value, both of you. Daughter who touched my robe and daughter who I'm choosing to heal now. You matter. In a world where women weren't worth much, he's saying, you matter. And so my question for you is, as Jesus followers, who in our world is told that they don't matter, that their voice doesn't count? Because Jesus has something to say about that. He says that we stand with them and say, you matter. Unfortunately, that's still women. Still women today. We need to say, you matter. Fully equal, fully equitable, should be at every table. We should say to people of every skin color, every skin tone, every ethnicity, even though there are voices that say you don't really matter, we as Jesus people say, you matter. Of other faith traditions in our world, there are some who want to say, particularly from Christian nationalism, the only one that matters is Christian. We as Jesus people need to say, as Jesus did himself, to other faith traditions and their followers, you matter. You are loved by God. And because this is the last day of June, which in our country we recognize as Pride Month, for those people who identify as our LGBTQIA+ neighbors, boy, more than ever, do we need to say, as Jesus would say, you matter. Which is why I'm wearing this t-shirt. You may have noticed every Sunday this month I've worn some variation of pride. The first week I wasn't teaching, but I still wore a Mickey Mouse Pride shirt that was cool, all about being you and all that, and it was Pride colors. And the second week I wore a Warriors t-shirt with Pride colors and stuff like that. Last week I wore a Giants shirt with Pride colors, and today I wear this one, where it says, "Into the wine, not the label." Anybody know what that reference is from? Thank you for saying Schitt's Creek out loud at church. I love it. That's just fun to do. Well, anyway, this was a very well written sitcom from I don't know, 6-8 years ago or so, and this line comes out in a scene where David, who is a central character, runs into a woman who he had biblical relations with, somewhat previously. You know what I mean, right? All right. And so he runs into her at the grocery store. And this woman had heard rumors that David had hooked up, that's another word that's not in the Bible, had hooked up with a man in town. And so she's very confused. And she goes up to him and says, I thought we had a thing going. And I kind of got the idea that we did based on our biblical knowledge of each other. And David tries to explain. And he says to her, as a metaphor, I'm into the wine, not the label. You get the meaning? I'm into the wine, not the label. For David, it meant that he was bisexual. I am what's called cisgender. I've been a straight guy my whole life. But when I wear this shirt, I am taking a stand with people who do not identify with me and say, you matter. You matter as a human being. Whatever letter you resonate with, you matter. The reality is, back in biblical times, they didn't know what we know today. They didn't know what we know today. But there were certainly gay people in biblical times, and we can point them out. There's one clear evidence of it in the New Testament. There's one really pretty clear evidence in the Older Testament. They're there. They've always been with us. Now what do we know? We know that whatever mechanical equipment you got when you were born, that's fine, but human sexuality is here. Lynn's uncle, for his career, worked with a pharmaceutical company that dealt with male impotency. And we had lunch with him a couple of months ago. We were talking about these issues because he's shifted in his church and things like that. And he said to us, we've known in the scientific industry that human sexuality is here, not here. And the church needs to catch up on that. And so, as you think about your tassel today, it really is a call to action on two levels. It's a call to action first to say, where do you need deep healing? And may you have the faith of that woman who is hemorrhaging for so long. To go against the letter of the law and go for the spirit of law, to go for the sozo that you think you want and the sozo that you may really need more. And have faith that God will work with you in the process. I don't know about you, but one more thing on prayer. Sometimes I think I'm holding stuff back from God, as if that's even possible. And as soon as I'm honest with myself about whatever it is, and oftentimes it's better when I do it on paper. It is amazing to me how God can work with that to bring sozo, one step at a time. I so encourage you to go fall at the feet of God and reach out for the Tzitzit on the Kanaph in pursuit of sozo. But then, Jesus followers, if you dare to claim to be, this is also a rally cry. This is for you to say, I'm going to follow Jesus, and that means that I'm going to stand up for those who need somebody to stand with them because they need somebody to stand with them. They're picked on because they can be picked on. They're picked on because they're in the minority and they can get away with it. But when people like you and me, who may look and act and feel and identify more with the majority, and we say, we see you, we are with you, and we proclaim that God loves you all, what might just happen? Could it be that more and more people might think about it a little harder, might be wooed, lured into the shalom and the spirit of shalom over the letter of the law, so that they might stand too. And we might see actual shalom slowly and surely pervade the whole world. That's the vision. You want to know what God's plan is for your life? Shalom. You know what God's plan is for the world and all the people and creation itself? Shalom. Now, some of you got some things in your head, and I'm messing with you today. And you may not be exactly sure if you agree with me. That's fine. But will you pray about that then? Will you pray for the sozo in your understanding? So that you might eventually have the sozo and the courage to stand with Jesus as he would. So I want to pray together, and then there's a rendition of the Lord's Prayer that we will pray together. But first, will you join me in prayer? Spirit of God that is not above us so much as you are around us and in us, surrounding us, with us, across from us, available to us at all times. Spirit of God who heals. Spirit of God who brings sozo in ways we think we need and want. Always sozo in what we need, even if we don't know we want it yet. We invite your healing flow into our lives. For some of us, it's just this general prayer, God, help me. Help me know more of who you want me to be. For some of us, it is very specific. And so we call out to you. We cry out to you. We reach out for the Tzitzit on the Kanaph because we long for the Sozo that we desperately need. With sighs too deep for words, we pray. And as fans of Jesus, who want to be more and more like Jesus, who want more and more shalom in our life and more shalom in the world, we pray for more sozo. And as we are dragging around our own tzitzits on our kanaph, on our robes, in our various ways, we call out to you, Spirit of God, for courage. Because sometimes it is terrifying to take a stand for those who need people to stand with them, or a planet that needs people to stand up for it, that we might proclaim shalom and love and care over it all, that it one day might be realized. Give us that conviction. Give us that care, that it may be true of us. To that end, we pray this prayer, and I know some of you in the back can't see it, so just nod along with me in agreement if you do. Let's pray it together. Good, caring presence within us, around us, and above us. Hold us in a sense of mystery and wonder. Let the fullness of your goodness be within us and around us. Let all the world know your ways of caring and generosity. May we find we have all we need to meet each day without undue anxiety. Overlook our many stupidities and help us to release everyone from their stupidities. May we all know that we are accepted. Strengthen us that we will reach out to others, always with the faith to rise above the ugly realities of our existence. We celebrate the gifts you have given us, the rich kingdom of life's possibilities, the power to do good, the triumphs of good, and the moments when we have seen the glory and wonder of everything. You are life's richness. You are life's power. You are life's ultimate meaning. Amen. May you go with shalom toward shalom as God is already doing that. Thanks for coming. See you next week.